Doctors, have you ever wanted to refuse a patient? I am a nurse at an allergy and immunology clinic. Since we are not an ER, we have the right to refuse patients. Most people are asked to leave simply because they are being assholes to the staff. People can get really angry and abusive about their bills. In my time, I have seen maybe 5 patients terminated for their inappropriate behavior. More often, the most interesting folks we turn away are not even patients. For a long time, we had a nice homeless man who would come in at least once a week in a tattered fake UPS uniform and ask if we had any packages. We would always tell him we did not, and he would quietly take a fistful of lollipops from the front desk and leave. We eventually had to tip off the building manager as patients were complaining, but I think about him every so often. I truly hope that somewhere, someone is providing him with candy.
It's wild how some people act when they're dealing with stress. I remember a time when someone was really rude to staff, and we had to send them away. But that guy in the UPS uniform? He goes to show that not every visitor has bad intentions. Just a simple guy looking for a little candy. Hope he's doing alright out there. Just makes you think about how we all handle tough times.
I once fired a patient for being an incredible pain in the ass. Details escape me. Years later, after I had moved to a new location, she showed up to make an appointment, not knowing I was there. New staff read her chart, "Do not ever appoint this person," and froze up with her in waiting room. They came to ask me what to do, but by the time I had gotten out there, she was already being crazy and said very loudly, "I would never come to this place. You are all very rude," and left of her own accord. She basically fired herself the second time.
That's kind of funny how things played out. The awkwardness with the new staff must have been something. It's wild when someone doesn't realize the history they have with someone else. Must have been a relief for you, though, to have her just exit on her own. Sometimes people just make it easier for you without even realizing it.
I worked in a GP surgery for a while, and I know one of them has transferred at least 3 patients, 2 guys, 1 girl, for declaring their love for her. Also, a couple of ridiculously violent people, usually pain pill seekers, get kicked out. Bear in mind this is in a dodgy area of Belfast, and half the patients are former/current paramilitary members, so violent means violent. Oh, that reminds me, a different DR in the same surgery had his coat stolen by a patient, and one of the other patients, who was a paramilitary member, who really liked him, made sure he got it back with everything in it, minus money that had already been spent, and told him the thief patient would never bother him again. So, I guess he had a patient refused on his behalf?
That sounds like an intense environment. It's wild how relationships can form in such unexpected places. The contrast between love declarations and violent patients is pretty stark. The story about the coat is kind of funny though. It's good to know there are some people looking out for the doctors. Just shows how complicated things can get in healthcare, especially in a rough area.
I was a nurse at a walk-in clinic when we had a patient come in for a spider bite. She had a small swollen spot on her, and was probably bitten by some common house spider. Definitely not venomous. She wanted the doctor to make it disappear so that she could work that night. She was a stripper and knew that she would make less money with a red swollen bump on her bum. The doctor couldn't do anything, and the patient got angry and started getting loud. She yelled loud enough for the whole clinic to hear. Well, just suck it. She wanted the doctor to suck the venom from her ass. We immediately asked her to leave. After a few minutes of arguing, we had to call the police. TLDR stripper wanted a spider bite on her ass sucked.
That is an interesting situation. I can't imagine how chaotic that must have been in the clinic. It's wild how some people can react in unexpected ways. The fact that she thought that would solve her problem was a bit much. Calling the police seems like a big step, but I guess things got out of hand. Just goes to show how weird things can get in a medical setting.
Some patients will obviously be difficult to care for, and there are plenty of other doctors in my area. A patient might call and insist on talking with me before making their initial appointment, then not let me off the phone with multiple questions. I'm generally busy, trying to get to the next patient. Worse, they will start to disagree with my over-the-phone answers. This has happened more than once, and I've said to them, "I'm sorry, but I can tell you would be better off with another physician." At that point, they always back down and talk about how they've heard how wonderful I am, etc., but I let them know they need to call somebody else. The first time this happened, I'd been in practice only a short time and had lots of openings in my schedule, so I was very hesitant to do it, but I was very glad that I did and realized I had control over my life and my practice.
It sounds like you had to set some clear boundaries early on. I remember a friend who was in a similar position when starting out in a tough job. They had clients trying to micromanage everything, which just made life harder. Eventually, they learned to say no and refer difficult clients elsewhere. It was tough at first, but it made a big difference in their work-life balance. Sometimes keeping control is the key.
I am a psychologist, but not a physician. I refuse to treat people all the time. However, by treatment, I really mean assessment, as this is what I do, along with some counseling in select cases. I refuse to treat adolescent patients that do not agree to therapy. It's a waste of everyone's time. I also refuse to treat or assess if there is even a hint of an upcoming child custody hearing. No.
Sounds like you have clear boundaries in your work. It's good to know your limits, especially in a field like psychology. Refusing to treat certain cases makes sense if you think it won't help anyone involved. It can be tough to navigate those situations, but prioritizing effective treatment is important. Keeping a focus on what you can manage likely leads to better outcomes for the clients you do choose to work with.
I had a patient come in so drunk, she couldn't walk wanting her crowns delivered. We didn't have them. She was rude, so all we did was re-cement her temporary crowns. I had another who's an alcoholic and somehow lost her new denture that I delivered for another doctor. She called me a year later upset that she didn't know what she did with them between the time she left the office and got home. I really wanted to ask her if she called the bar she stopped at to see about the lost and found. I just told her we could make a new one for her if she paid.
I once had a patient who stumbled in wanting her crowns delivered. She was so drunk she couldn't even stand. We just re-cemented her temporary ones because we didn't have the new ones. Another patient called me a year later about her lost dentures. You could tell she didn't remember a thing from that night. I didn't say much, just offered to make her a new set if she wanted to pay for it.
I had a doc discharge/refuse me once. I was 16, and he was my neurologist for my epilepsy. I had only seen him a couple of times. My parents, divorced, were fighting over who would pay for my doctor visits, and so I wasn't able to see him as often as I was supposed to. He told me I was irresponsible and I should try harder. Dick.
That sounds rough. Being 16 and dealing with health issues is already tough. It's frustrating when adults can't see the bigger picture. It wasn't your fault that your parents were fighting about money. Taking responsibility is important, but the pressure from a doctor in that situation doesn't help at all. Sometimes they forget that it's not just about the patient, but also their circumstances.
This is also the other side of the coin, but as a teen in the 90s, I was particularly entrenched in the whole grunge/punk look. I had terrible problems with ovarian cysts and had ongoing medical treatment for it. At one point, I was sent for an ultrasound, and the tech performing it started berating me, saying, "Your pain is obviously from all of the scar tissue here from your abortion," and kept making comments of the like. I was 16, in pain, and was horrified by what this man was saying to me. I had never had an abortion. I realized later that he had made assumptions because of how I was dressed, and realized just how shitty people can be sometimes.
It's wild how people jump to conclusions based on appearances. I remember a friend in high school who wore all black and had a punk vibe. People thought they were troubled, but they were just really into music and art. It's sad how a single encounter can leave lasting impressions, like in that situation with the ultrasound tech. It's a reminder that assumptions can hurt, and we should just treat people with respect.
I'm on the other side of this one. When I was in my 20s back in the 80s, I was working for a really shitty factory. I was unloading a truck and pulled a groin muscle, and at first it did not seem too bad and I just ignored it. One day it really flared up and I was kind of scared and hurting, so I went to a local clinic, and at admitting I was asked if it was work-related and said yes, and the admitting lady stared at me as if I had two heads. I went in to see the doctor and told him what was wrong, and the asshole said, "You can't sue your company. You can go back to work tomorrow." And that was it. No explanation of what was wrong or any attempt at help, all delivered with a dismissive and contemptuous voice. At the time, I was young and dumb and pretty used to being treated like crap at home and at work, so I just left and accepted that as my fate. I have matured a lot since then and don't take that shit anymore.
It's rough when you realize the system isn't on your side. I had a similar experience at a job where I got hurt and felt brushed off too. It's surprising how much a bad experience can shape you. Back then, I tolerated a lot without question. Now, I'd handle it differently. It's a tough lesson, but it helps you grow and know your worth over time. Things change as you learn to stand up for yourself.
Nurse here. Known drug addict patient complaining of headache pain. I offered her Tylenol first and explained that if that didn't work, we would offer her something stronger. She started screaming at the top of her lungs that she needed for Dilaudid, actually Dilaudid, but that is what she said, that pills did not work for her, and the only thing that helped was for Dilaudid. Then she fired me. I was certainly relieved.
Sounds like a pretty intense situation. Dealing with patients like that can be rough. It's nice when you can step back from a difficult interaction. Not every patient is going to be reasonable, especially when they're struggling with addiction. It's probably a good thing you didn't have to deal with the stress any longer. Sometimes it's just better to let those kinds of situations go.
I took my daughter to the pediatrician's a while back. We were in the examining room, waiting on the doctor's arrival. I received a call from my boss at work and answered because she hadn't arrived. The doctor opened the door, saw me on my phone, and rudely told me she'd return when I decided the appointment was more important than my phone call. If it hadn't been an on-base doctor, a major I think, I would have responded in kind. Instead, I bit my lip. I know I wasn't the doctor, but this one refused me for the time I was on my phone. Damn work calls.
It's frustrating when you're trying to focus on something important, like your kid's health, and then a work call comes in. It sounds like the doctor could have handled it better. Sometimes you just have to hold your tongue, even when you'd rather say something back. At least you kept your cool in the moment, which is always tough to do. Balancing work and personal life can really be a pain.
It's pretty normal to decline a ride in the ambulance when it's obvious it's not necessary. It's the doctor's decision. In my country, Czech Republic, people started to call an ambulance whenever something small occurred instead of going to the ER. Why? Because they would have to pay a fee of 90 crowns there. Yes, America. You pay literally thousands of dollars in care, and here people won't even pay $3.50. Czechs didn't even want to pay 30 CZK, $1, for a GP, so the parliament abolished it. Funny, huh?
It's interesting how people react to healthcare costs in different countries. In the Czech Republic, they seem to avoid small fees for basic services. It makes you think about what people prioritize when it comes to their health, and how the system shapes those decisions. The contrast with places like the US is pretty stark. It's a culture thing, really, and shows how economics can influence behavior.
I was working in a physical therapist's office, or something of the like AITA exactly, doing construction. I got to experience the lady who schedules patients and run the general routine of the office. Call someone out on forging and lying about what prescription she was getting. Needless to say, she came in flipping shit. Unfortunate for the people in the office. Hilarious for me to watch it unfold.
It sounds like you had a front row seat to some office drama. It's always interesting to see how people handle pressure, especially when they're caught in a lie. I can imagine the tension in the room. Those situations can be pretty uncomfortable for everyone else, but sometimes it's hard not to find the humor in it. It's like watching a real-life soap opera unfold.
My sister was friends with a girl whose father would intentionally hurt himself, so he could have time off of whatever work he had, and so the clinic, we called it the Band-Aid station, would supply him with pain pills. Yeah, we separated ourselves from this guy and his family after he managed to break his hand at 3 a.m. and had to call my dad to take him to the hospital. My dad managed to coax an honest answer out of the guy, and he said he smashed his hand with a hammer. He told the doctors at the ER he slammed his hand in the car door.
That's a pretty wild story. I can see how that would be a major red flag. The lengths some people go to for attention or help can be surprising. It definitely sounds like your family made the right call distancing from that situation. It's just strange how far someone will go, not thinking about the impact on others. Not something you expect to encounter in everyday life.
I'm an ED doctor, and I have a pretty low tolerance for these kind of patients. I understand it's frustrating and stressful for people, and I'm more than patient with people who want to get angry and blame us staff for waiting times. Abuse is abuse, though, and we're well within our legal rights to eject certain people from the department without treatment. Doesn't happen very often, but we shouldn't have to feel abused and unsafe at work.
It sounds like a tough job. Dealing with frustrated patients can wear you down. It's understandable to have a limit on what you tolerate, especially when it becomes abusive. Safety in the workplace is important, and it's good that you can draw a line when needed. Those moments must be challenging, but standing your ground is essential for maintaining some kind of order in a hectic environment.
I'm an oncologist. Had a patient with a Munchausen-like thing who just refused to accept that he was tumor-free and required no more treatment. Went doctor shopping, including to some of my colleagues, hoping someone would biopsy something, maybe give him some more chemo. Very, very weird and disturbing.
It's wild how some people get so attached to their illnesses. I had a friend who couldn't let go of an old injury. He kept going to different doctors, hoping for another surgery when he really just needed to move on. It's tough to understand why someone would want to cling to something harmful. Just goes to show how complicated our minds can be when it comes to health.
I have diagnosed one person with Munchausen's in my career at 2 a.m. on a weekend in the ER, which is most impressive because I had to get records from like 6 different hospitals. And man, did she have a great story. She knew exactly what kind of chemo to say she was getting, etc. What initially tipped me off was that her hair under the cap she was wearing was shaved off and stubbly. I had a discussion with the patient and her family that was there and revealed this to them all, and the family was obviously flabbergasted. The really weird part was that for a few weeks after I kept seeing her in the news, she had even had fundraisers, etc., and then used the money to buy crazy shit. I set up a Google alert with her name, and to this day, I still occasionally see her come up.
That's a wild story. It's shocking how some people can craft such elaborate narratives. The hair thing is a huge giveaway, though. It must have been a surreal moment, revealing the truth in front of her family. Seeing her in the news after must have felt even weirder, knowing what you knew. It's strange how things like this can stick with you over time. Guess some people are really committed to their stories.
I really wonder how often MDs get hit on. Like seriously hit on, not just flirted with. I mean, my gum surgeon is cute as hell, and my mom is also super into him, winky face. When my husband was in med school, they had fake clinical days where they hired patients to fill a role, dying/terminal DX, and one who disrobed and went for it so they could practice how to handle those situations.
It's interesting to think about. I guess with all that pressure in med school, humor and flirting might break the tension a bit. The idea of actors playing patients is wild though. It feels like a mix of serious and bizarre. Your gum surgeon sounds like he left an impression beyond just his medical skills. Bet those fake clinical days had some awkward moments for the students.
Makes me wonder. I've been diagnosed with BPD for a year now, but would have never even thought about hurting myself to this extreme. Even in support groups, I never heard those who have what I have ever mentioned this, and we're supposed to talk about a lot, but this level never comes up. Wonder if there's different severities to this disorder. Probably wouldn't want to know, don't need to drown myself in information about something I have and make my paranoia worse.
It sounds tough dealing with that kind of diagnosis. Everyone's experience with mental health can really vary. It's good that you're aware of how you feel and what you want to avoid. It's easy to get lost in too much information, especially when it comes to paranoia. Just focusing on your own journey and finding what works for you is probably the best approach.
This is a scenario that's been used in the past to trap people. We talked about this in a training course I took. A woman in distress is a big lure for the helpful guy. As soon as you turn your back, boyfriend attacks. In the course, they taught it as a lesson to keep your situational awareness, but there are many legitimate reasons to not get involved, particularly in late at night or a domestic dispute. In every situation, you have to consider your own safety first. People should remember this.
It's true. I remember a time when someone asked me for directions at night. I hesitated, thinking about safety. You just can't be too careful. I've heard stories where being too helpful leads to trouble. It's not worth it. Sometimes it's better to just observe and keep your distance. Situational awareness really is key, regardless of how much you want to help someone in need. Prioritize your safety first, always.
One of my friends had a serious case of controlling/possible sociopathic stepmom and was threatened with going to a counselor to deal with her behavior. I always encourage her to go because maybe it would help with her stepmom being psycho. But it's nice to hear you wouldn't have forced her if she didn't agree to it.
It's tough when family dynamics get complicated. I had a friend in a similar situation. Their stepmom was really overbearing, and it caused a lot of stress. I just listened and tried to help her see things from different angles. In the end, she decided to talk to someone on her own, and it did help her find some perspective. Sometimes, just having support makes a difference.
I refuse to treat adolescent patients that do not agree to therapy. It's a waste of everyone's time. As a kid who spent most of elementary and middle school staring at the wall of a shrink's office and waiting for the sessions to be over, thank you. My folks wasted so much money, well, so much of their insurer's money, trying to get me help I wasn't prepared to accept. The real irony is now when I kind of would like to see a therapist, it's too expensive to justify with the crap insurance I have and how little money I make.
I get where you're coming from. Those sessions can feel pointless if you're not ready. It's frustrating that when you finally want to talk, the cost becomes a barrier. It's tough navigating mental health when access feels more like a privilege than a necessity. Sometimes you just need something that clicks at the right time.
Yeah, I pulled a muscle in my back at work once. Having no clue about how workers' comp worked, I just went to the doctor the next day. He gave me a bunch of meds and told me to take it easy. I was like, okay, well, I have to work tonight. He just laughed and said, not after taking those. Darvocet, Flexeril, and ibuprofen. I think I took the one night off, and when I told my boss why, he freaked. I didn't know I was supposed to see their doc, etc. After I talked to him in HR, they relaxed when they realized I had no intention of suing them.
That sounds like a rough situation. I can see how confusing it must have been, especially not knowing the workers' comp rules. Getting meds and then realizing you can't go to work is a bit wild. Good thing your boss calmed down once they knew you weren't trying to make it a big deal. It's like navigating a maze when you just want to heal and get back to your routine.
As a resident, And I feel that I speak on behalf of many of us out there. We cannot thank you enough for what you do. So many times a pharmacist has called me to double-check an order, and I am always thankful for the call. All too often it has resulted in improved dosing or takes into account something we hadn't thought of initially. So FYI, thanks and we love you guys, smiley face.
It's cool to hear about the pharmacist's impact. They really do play a crucial role in the healthcare process. Sometimes, just a simple call can make a big difference in treatment. It's nice to know that there's a team looking out for patient safety like that. We often take those little interactions for granted, but they can change outcomes. Nice to see some appreciation for their work.
I'm a chronic pain sufferer who sometimes communicates with other CP patients or reads message boards. I'm always amazed at the misconceptions people have about pharmacists. They're not doctors. They should go back to counting pills like they're supposed to. Yeah, they're doctors. That D after pharm, what do you think it stands for? They call my doctor's office. That's a violation of my HIPAA. Sick, they always spell it wrong. Rather than HIPAA, rights. Nope, communication between doctor and pharmacy falls under providing treatment. I give pharmacists a tip of my metaphorical hat. It's a rigorous and risky job, being the last person to check an order before the medication is dispensed to the patient, and I think the general public fails to appreciate that.
It's interesting how people misunderstand the role of pharmacists. A friend of mine used to think they were just there to count pills. But when he had to deal with a chronic condition, he realized how knowledgeable and crucial they really are. They often know a lot about medications and can help prevent mistakes. It's a tough job, and their communication with doctors is actually essential for patient care. People should really appreciate that more.
I do not miss working in a pharmacy. I was just a tech, but it was at a chain store where management seemed to not care at all about the laws. I'd like to imagine independent stores are fully able to turn away customers. We turned a few away, and every single one of them called corporate. Corporate then called us, and suddenly the pharmacist had to fill the orders. We're talking dates were changed with no DR initials. Medications that didn't exist, like the dosage wasn't actually a thing they made. We actually couldn't fill that one even when corporate called us, and signed prescriptions, being screamed at by seniors because they should be paying 4 cents instead of 10 cents for the medication, seriously.
I get it. Working in that kind of environment can be draining. It sounds like the management really didn't have the staff's back. I've seen places where rules don't matter, and it just leads to a mess. People can be difficult, especially when it comes to their health and money. I can see why you don't miss it. It's good to be out of that kind of stress.
My pharmacists have saved my life. Several times during my cancer pain management, I would be given 3 to 4 different meds to take at the same time. When I would go to pick them up, the pharmacist would tell me that basically it is hydrocodone in every one and that I'd risk overdose if I took them the way they were prescribed.
It's pretty eye-opening to think about how much our pharmacists catch that we might miss. I remember when a friend went through something similar. They were prescribed multiple pain meds at once, but thankfully, their pharmacist stepped in to let them know it wasn't safe. It's a reminder to always double-check and communicate with healthcare professionals. Sometimes they're the ones who really have your back.
I was given Dilaudid after an appendectomy, and I can't imagine anyone wanting that stuff. As it was being injected into my fore, it felt like fire traveling through my veins. Then my fingers and toes went numb. The world started spinning. ANF, I started vomiting. The nurse assured me that I was making it up and Dilaudid didn't cause reactions like that. I toughed it out until that dose and its side effects wore off and proceeded to recover with only ibuprofen after that. I also recovered from ovarian cyst surgery and later, a C-section with only ibuprofen.
That sounds pretty rough. Getting surgery is already challenging, and dealing with the aftermath of the meds just adds to it. It's wild how different painkillers can affect people. I get how you decided to stick with ibuprofen after that experience. Sometimes simpler is better when it comes to recovery.
A lot of people assume that getting brought in an ambulance means you'll get bumped to the top of the waiting list in the ER, so they don't have to wait for ages. Of course, they've no clue about triage, nor the thinking skills to realize that the stabbing victims and heart attacks are always going to get treated over a broken bone.
It's true. I remember when a friend thought the same thing after twisting his ankle badly. He figured since he arrived by ambulance, he'd be seen first. But there were others with more serious issues, and he waited for hours. It was a long night of discomfort for him, and it made him see how triage really works. Guess some lessons hit harder than expected.
There are quite a lot of problems where you wouldn't want family members transporting patients. Remember that some patients, e.g., with suspected spinal trauma, shouldn't be moved without precautions, and that some patients, e.g., with suspected might need an ambulance because those carry a lot of drugs and equipment that can be really useful. Obviously, I don't mean call an ambulance for a stubbed toe, but it's okay to let 911 make that call. No pun intended.
This reminds me of a time when my friend decided to drive his brother with a possible concussion to the hospital instead of calling an ambulance. He thought it was no big deal, but it could have been risky. Sometimes, the urgency of a situation calls for professionals with the right equipment. It's better to err on the side of caution and let the experts handle it.
Yet believe it or not, if they hadn't faxed me a copy with a note attached asking me to provide my real signature, I'd never have found out. Edit. All the requests were in writing, none by phone. As I mentioned somewhere below, I'm beginning to suspect that the note I got from DHS might have been another fraudulent attempt by my patient to get me to sign the form.
That's a strange situation. It's unsettling when you can't trust a document, especially from a government agency. It sounds like your patient might have been trying to pull a fast one. It's good that you caught it early, but it makes you wonder how often stuff like this happens. Just goes to show, always double-check things.
That sucks. My dentist keeps handing out hydro and oxy prescriptions to me like candy. Probably because my teeth are obviously shitty as hell. I'll go in to have her check something out that hurts, and she'll call in a prescription before I leave. The crappy thing with my teeth is I'll have severe pain for 2 days, and by the time I get an appointment and a prescription, the pain will vanish, and I'll be fine for another 4 months without doing anything about it. I even tell her not to bother with the pills, but she says to take it just in case. They have come in handy when something flares up unexpectedly, and I can't get it taken care of right away, but I still feel shady for hoarding all these pain meds I'll never really use when other people have such a hard time getting them for legit reasons.
It's a weird situation to be in. You don't want to depend on pain meds, yet they're handed to you so easily. It's good you're aware of your situation and the potential misuse. Keeping them for emergencies makes sense, but it's also a bit unsettling to have them around when you know others struggle for them. Just gotta figure out a better path for your dental issues.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.